Hey folks, Sean here, and today what I want to talk to you about is how I see product development teams changing everywhere because of the rise of popularity of AI tools like ChatGPT. Now, since these tools have become more popular, there's been a lot of debate circling in terms of what that's going to mean for jobs and changing teams. Now, as a B2B SaaS consultant, I work with a lot of these companies developing and growing their product development teams. As such, what I want to talk to you about is how I see these tools changing these teams over a period of time. Now, you may be familiar with ChatGPT, but what I think is particularly interesting is its ability to essentially write code. Now, this comes from what I'm sharing with you here, this OpenAI Codex, which is the component of the OpenAI tool that you can leverage through ChatGPT to give it natural language commands and have it write code for you. This is really interesting, and a lot of the folks that I know in product development are leveraging it very heavily in order to save a lot of time in producing features and entire applications, actually. So let's see a demo about how this works. So I want to show you a real-time demo of leveraging ChatGPT in order to create, for example, a subroutine. I think this is really cool. We'll see how it works in real time, but I've leveraged this to create content for an article that I've written recently on the same topic. So let's see how it goes in real time on the video. Write me a subroutine for swapping variables in Node.js. Enter. All right, so here's the tool doing its thing. It understood the command, which is pretty common when you're teaching folks software engineering in a language in particular, and it's creating for me the subroutine that I was looking for, which would be essentially a function for swapping one variable to another assignment. And then it's even giving me code in terms of how it works, and then ultimately how I might use it, plus a description down below if you can see that, and how it might name it and all that kind of stuff in terms of the function, how I might call it, how I might use it, for example. Now, this is the example that I was referring to, and I think this is one of the most disruptive components of seeing this Codex portion of the OpenAI tool and how you can access it from ChatGPT in real time. This is going to give engineering teams the ability to eliminate what is potentially a significant bottleneck for them when it comes to creating and writing code. And that might be building features, but that could also be all the way up to and including building applications. So I think this is really disruptive capability, and we're going to see this leveraged significantly more often in product development processes in teams everywhere. So here's the problem that product development teams, in my opinion, are facing, and what I think tools like ChatGPT and this OpenAI Codex are going to be used in order to solve. And that's that the engineering component of the product development process has been the bottleneck for a long time. It's been years at least in the making, where we have requirements and things that we want to build, but ultimately getting those into the product is what takes the longest. As such, that's what this reflection of this visual is intended to indicate, in that engineering is the bottleneck. Now, tools like OpenAI and their natural language processing ability to translate what I need into code, I think are going to have the potential to significantly disrupt engineering as the bottleneck, because they're going to enable us to speed that process up considerably. Let's see some examples of how companies are thinking about leveraging this tool in the research that I've done so far. Here's an article from Business Insider, and from the title alone, you can tell what companies like OpenAI are planning to do with training their AI tools in order to be able to provide advanced software engineering services and potentially even replace some software engineers on various product development teams. Now, your next question might be, but how advanced are these tools? What are their real capabilities? Well, let's see an example of that. Here's a PC Magazine article that talks about ChatGPT passing the Google Level 3 interview for a software engineering job with a potential starting salary of $183,000 a year. So this should give you some example of how advanced these tools already are at the moment. Now, if you think about what they're capable of now, consider how advanced they're going to get in a few years. And this is why it's really important to consider figuring out how to leverage these tools and how they're expected to change product development teams now, so that you're ready for when those changes come into effect in the mass market. So now your next question might be, okay, so if these tools are coming for at least some or potentially all of the work some of us as software engineers on product development teams are doing today, what should we be focusing on, and how can we prepare for this new future? Well, one skill that I think is going to rise sharply in demand is something referred to as prompt engineering. Here's a definition of it here. It's essentially getting good at asking these tools the right questions to figure out how to get the answer that you need as effectively and efficiently as possible. And I showed you a demo of that where I had ChatGPT create a swap routine for me in Node.js. It's going to be figuring out, getting good at leveraging skills like that in order to get the piece that you need to continue to put your puzzle together as fast and as effectively as possible. Okay, so we know how ChatGPT and AI tools are likely to disrupt the engineering component of our product development team. Let's talk about how the product role is expected to change as well too. Well, if the bottleneck is truly eliminated or dramatically reduced, in that being the software engineering part of the product development process, that's going to make way for more investment into where we can provide the greatest impact to improve the product development process itself. And that's in discovery and research area. This slide gives you an idea in terms of where the impact can be felt based on how much you're investing in discovery and research. Long story short here is there should be more time and effort likely being invested here as the bottleneck that is software engineering is somewhat eliminated, and we figure out how much more from a velocity perspective we're able to ship. Now, because this isn't being heavily invested in a lot of product development teams everywhere right now, which is a big part of what I help B2B SaaS companies with, probably isn't as painfully obvious in terms of how poorly we are performing this activity today, in that the discovery and research that isn't getting done is ultimately leading to features that are being shipped which are not providing a lot of value for customers and not really building a lot of value into the organization either. Now, the reason why that may not be as painfully obvious is because software engineering process at the moment is slow. So if that continues to speed up, it's going to become more and more obvious how ineffective that process currently is, meaning that the demand for investing further into research and discovery is likely to rise, which means changes to product teams. More product managers, more product researchers investing in this process and trying to make this process as efficient as it can be as well too. But there's going to be a problem with that as well because it's likely to become the new bottleneck. Okay, so if we know that discovery and research is likely to become the new bottleneck, then what are we going to be doing from an investment perspective in order to address that problem? Well, as product teams are going to be continually changing and as we're investing more in discovery and research, we're going to need better tools and resources in order to speed the efficiency of that process up. So tools like Dovetail, which I have listed here on the screen, this is something that we use when we provide discovery sprints, research sprints as a service. We leverage this tool in order to be able to process the interviews that we create, in order to highlight certain sections, extract trends, and make it easier to be able to share this information around with our team, which will make it more obvious in terms of where the opportunity is, in terms of the direction that we should build and the solutions that we should provide through our product. I wanted to quickly share with you the fact that our team provides these research and discovery sprints as a service. So if this becomes a bottleneck for your team, we can provide this as a service for you. This is something that's really important for your company to be able to invest in. We can help you with it, eliminating it as a bottleneck in your process. I'll include a link in the description below in case you have any greater interest. All right, now to give you an example of how evolving and changing technology ultimately leads to disruptions at organizations and teams, I want to share with you something I lived through when I was working in a data center for quite a while in an earlier portion of my career. Now, if you're unfamiliar, data centers are essentially where all the servers that run lots of our applications, which are now primarily web-based, are stored, and they used to be managed, and sometimes still are, on a per company basis, especially if they invest heavily in technology. I've worked at a lot of companies that have made significant investments here. As such, I've fulfilled a lot of roles at these companies when working in data centers. Because a big part of my background was hardware engineering, and then ultimately I became software engineering. So at data centers, what ultimately was the bottleneck, this is probably 15 to 20 years or so ago, but the bottlenecks were physical resources, as in we had physical servers and you required those in order to be able to run the applications that were important for whatever your customers or users needed. Now, one of the problems we were running into in this kind of early to mid 2000s era was that we were running out of physical space and the ability to be able to manage all these things, because having a significant amount of this infrastructure required a considerable amount of cooling, cabling, a bunch of other infrastructure related investments, and we were simply just running out of those resources. So at the time, that was the bottleneck, and that remained the case until new technology was invented. And I'll shift my head over here so you can see that full logo, but until this technology, which is ultimately today referred to as virtualization, was invented. Now, when it was, what it enabled us to be able to do was to be able to carve up resources in a virtual way, as in we didn't need additional physical servers. We could share the resources on some of these physical servers, especially those that were underutilized. And this led to a dramatic revolution in terms of what we were capable of from a managing and a planning, and in particular an investment perspective related to all the costs associated with running these data centers. So these technologies pave the way to have this type of a transformation where we went from before, in a lot of these instances, row after row after row of a ton of hardware server infrastructure to significantly smaller resources. And actually the trend reversed itself, where we were trying to figure out how are we going to have enough physical space to have all of this hardware and all this cabling and all this cooling. What we ended up having as a real problem was we have all this extra wasted space now. We don't need any more of it. So what are we going to do with that? As such, that was a pretty dramatic transformation. Now, it took a couple of years in order to really reach that peak, but ultimately what we were predicting didn't come to pass. And what we actually ended up realizing was something considerably different than that. So I want to talk about what that meant for changing teams relevant to this topic that we're talking about. So your teams went from this before graphic that you can see here to the after, in that there were a lot of folks that were working on and managing the hardware infrastructure. As such, those skills are really important and those were in demand, to managing software and understanding how to leverage the tools that were necessary in order to figure out how to best make use of the hardware that we had access to. So hardware skills started to become lower in terms of demand and more commoditized. Software skills rose in popularity because that was something that we needed in order to get the most out of the new system and the changing technology. So you can probably see some of the corollaries here in terms of how this situation applies to what we're talking about in terms of how AI tools and ChatGPT are likely to also further disrupt how product development teams operate, and in particular the software engineering role. So to summarize, as I provided this demonstration earlier, software engineering, in particular in product development teams, is likely to be highly disrupted in terms of us no longer really needing to be able to write a ton of custom software engineering. Instead, we'll be able to leverage tools like ChatGPT and this OpenAI Codex component in order to be able to write the code for us. So instead of all of our team members writing custom software engineering, we're going to be requesting the pieces, almost like Lego pieces, to put together our features and our software applications considerably faster and likely significantly less error prone. So you and your team should be preparing for developing skills in prompt engineering and realizing that ultimately over time, the individuals are likely to write a lot less, especially of the lower level code, than these tools are ultimately going to be able to provide, because we just simply won't be able to do so as fast or as effectively as they can. Now, the other changes that are coming to those product teams, as I mentioned as well, is likely in the discovery and the research area, which is where you're going to be able to get significant impact. So if you aren't investing in that today, you need to be investing in it now, and you're likely going to get more time to be able to invest in it as these tools make their way into product development teams everywhere. Now, also to note, as I mentioned before as well too, is that's likely to become the new bottleneck. So what you should be doing is figuring out how to leverage tools and resources in order to speed that process up. I shared one with you in the terms of Dovetail, and then I also mentioned that my company offers it as a service if this is something that you ever need help with. So there's help there as well too, in terms of training and investing into this as a process, because it's likely to help you get considerably greater impact out of your product development efforts. Hey folks, Sean here, and thanks for watching my content. I hope you got a ton of value out of it. If you did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you can be notified when more content like this becomes available. Now, if you'd like to reach product market fit faster for your B2B SaaS product, I'd encourage you to sign up for my free 5-day email course at nextstep.io/fit. I'll include a link in the description below where you can sign up. And my question for you today, which I'd love for you to share in the comments below, is how do you think evolving AI tools like ChatGPT and Codex are likely to change product development?